behalf of festival co-directors Namita Gokhale and William Dalrymple, and all my colleagues at Teamwork Arts, I welcome you to the 100th session of JLF's Brave New World. In April 2020, as the COVID-19 pandemic forced a global lockdown, isolating millions, Teamwork Arts, the producers of the iconic Jaipur Literature Festival, launched JLF's Brave New World, an online series to allow for the free flow of knowledge and information across international and city boundaries. JLF's Brave New World sought to address issues critical to our times through conversations with renowned writers and leading experts from across the world. And in just a few months, we've been able to capture the attention of over 2.8 million viewers. The series has hosted over 200 speakers, including Nobel laureates, Man Booker, Pulitzer, Sahitya Academy, Commonwealth, JCB Prize, Crossword, DSC Prize winners. And these include Abhijit V. Banerjee and Esther Duflo, Chitra Banerjee Devakurni, Colm Toibin, Devdutt Patnaik, His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, Howard Jacobson, Elizabeth Gilbert, Ira Makhoti, Jhumpa Lahiri, Margaret Atwood, Neil Gaiman, Orhan Pamuk, Paul Muldoon, Peter Frankopan, Peter Carey, Peter Morgan, Ruskin Bond, Shobha Mudgal, Shashi Tharoor, Dr. Siddharth Mukherjee, and Sonal Mansingh, among others. All our sessions are available to view on our Facebook page, JLF Litfest, or on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. Our official radio partner is Red FM, Bajate Raho. Our session today, marking the 100th episode, is George Saunders in conversation with Amitava Kumar. George Saunders shares insights into the mosaic of his prolific life and genre-bending body of work. In conversation with writer Amitava Kumar, Saunders, the master of modern fiction, discusses the state of contemporary literature, its relation with power and politics, and the place of darkness and kindness in stories today. George Saunders is the author of Lincoln in the Bardo, winner of the Man Booker Prize, and the story collection 10th of December, a National Book Award finalist, and winner of the Folio Prize. A 2016 MacArthur Fellow, he teaches at Syracuse University. Amitava Kumar is the author of several books of nonfiction and 2 novels. His novel, Immigrant Montana, was named one of the best books of the year by the New Yorker and the New York Times, and included in Barack Obama's list of favorite books of 2018. His new novel, A Time Outside This Time, is coming out next year. Please do remember to comment in the comment section below, and in case any of you drop off due to bandwidth issues, just come right back on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. Ladies and gentlemen, George Saunders and the making of Lincoln and the Bardo in conversation with Amitava Kumar. Over to both of you.
Thank you. Welcome, George. How are you?
Welcome, Ami. How are you, sir? Good to see you.
Good. We'll start the interview by asking for your credit card number.
Yeah. You already have it from 1987.
Good. So, listen, George, on Twitter the other day, there was this tweet by a writer called Amy Silverberg. It said, America right now is a George Saunders short story, but without the humor. Is that an accurate description of America right now?
Well, I think one thing that's happening for me is I'm starting to see that there were certain tendencies in early stories where I was picking up on certain vibes, and those things are really coming to fruition now. So, for example, a lot of my stories have narrators or characters who are just a little bit stupid, a little well-intentioned, but not very precise in their thinking, sort of, mindlessly hopeful, whistling in the dark. And so I'm starting to see that wasn't just a personal flaw of my imagination, but I was picking up on something in the air. So there's something very strange going on here, as you know. But I didn't cause it. I didn't cause it. I just noticed it.
Right. Most recently, your story in the New Yorker, Love Letter, was, I thought, remarkably prescient about the way in which in this society, in this country, we are sliding towards some sort of an intolerant authoritarian regime. But it was also that story itself. Would you mind telling our listeners a little bit about, what the setup is and what you are saying there? Because I think that is as close a description we can get of our current situation.
Yeah, it's really just a short letter. The story's in the form of a letter from a grandfather to his grandson, of whom he's very fond. And as the letter develops, you see that we're a little bit in the future, and the grandson is kind of faced with a choice about how involved to get in the politics of the moment. And the grandfather is kind of urging caution, but even as he does so, he's kind of changing his position a little bit. So really, it was in a sense, it was one of the easiest things I've ever written, because I just channeled my actual feelings about things. I had a big discussion with my father about politics, and then a big discussion with our daughter's boyfriend about politics. And they were both lovely conversations, that kind of full-hearted, what should we do, how should we live conversation. So I just thought that's a beautiful modality, when you turn to a friend and you say, really though, what's the real problem? How should we fix it? So some of that got in the story. And then, how it is when you're writing fiction, you find out what you really believe. And what I felt was my own impotence in this political moment. This was before the virus even, but the sense that things really were spinning out of control, and what does one do about it in that situation. So that all kind of came into the story.
Yeah. And I thought what one does in this situation, especially as a writer, is report on it as honestly as one can. And your reporting was filled with foreboding. It seemed as if you have a certain part of you that is afraid that Trump will win the election again, and it will go even worse later on. Is that your actual feeling, or is that just what the narrator was thinking, or the letter writer was thinking?
No, that's my feeling. This is before the pandemic, which he's handled so badly that it's actually affecting his polling thing. But I am from the Midwest and from probably a vaguely working class background, and I know more people for Trump than against him, I think, in my personal sphere. And they're nice people, and they're loving people, and so I am worried. I think a lot of the reality doesn't make it into the polling, and really, I think, I hate to say it, but I think if you're talking about America, you can never underestimate our banality and our kind of exceptionalism and to some extent our stupidity. The sense of if an American person is insulated from need and want, there's a kind of a blindness to anybody else's suffering. And I think in this moment, you can see that in the kind of resilient support for Trump in spite of all the data. So I am very worried, yes. Yeah. Because, it seems like, I don't know if you feel this, but I look around and I almost can't believe where we've come to, in terms of what we're tolerating now. These federal officers on the street and so on. It's very strange and it's apocalyptic and I'm worried. I'm worried.
Yeah. Let me pick on one of the phrases that you just offered. You said much of the reality doesn't make it into the polls. The polls that seem positive, or to say that Trump is going to lose. Does much of the reality make it into contemporary fiction? I wanted to ask, because the organizers listed our conversation as also being about writing and politics. I just wanted to ask you, what do you read, or what are you reading, or do you see people responding imaginatively to a political or cultural reality?
It's a great question. Yeah, it's really a question of our time. And, I feel as a man of a certain age, I find myself asking that question more and more, like, why do we do this? Is this really what I want to do with what remains of my life? I think there's a bit of an issue in American fiction because it's predominantly done by one type of person. It's done by a progressive, liberal, educated person who's in on the secret. So in a certain way, it has a limited scope, and the things that one digs into tend to be, there's the danger of it being a predetermined conversation. So that's one thing. The other thing is that, as I know you know, the form of say a short story, it predisposes it to do certain things. So for example, as I practice it, if I write a story about a chair, I want you to feel compassionate about that chair by the end. I want you to notice that chair. You know, it's a particular chair and you're fond of it. You could argue that has a limited political utility, because if the move is always love, understand, be sympathetic, there are certain people for whom the ultimate compassion wouldn't be first order sympathy. In other words, there are some people who really are up to bad things. And so I think that's another issue, is that fiction is an empathy scale model. And there are some human behaviors and human mindsets that are very difficult to both convey truthfully and to feel sympathetically about. And some that sympathy wouldn't be the first thing we should feel. That would be sort of enabling, you know. So I'm noticing that as we get into these political moments, my impulse now is to just write the story that will solve everything, you know. And I know when we were young writers together at Syracuse, you and I and Paula, there was this idea that the right story could solve everything. You know, I felt that. I felt if someone could just write the right book, all evil would dissipate. Well, as we get older, we see that isn't the case. And I think that occasions a very interesting conversation about what does fiction actually do? You know, what are its limits? What's its power? And I find myself very, very much in the middle of that now, you know, and I don't have an answer, but it's interesting to have a new question at this age.
Sure. Well, thank you. Let me draw you out a little bit further on that. This is also via Twitter. I know you're not on social media, but I find it a great resource. A writer who might have studied under you, Gabe Hudson, he wrote the other day, George Saunders taught me how story writes itself when character's heart is in conflict with itself, like mine is about writing. He says, I think Saunders got concept from Faulkner. So I tweeted back, yeah, from Faulkner's Nobel speech. And I'm quoting Faulkner now. The problems of the human heart in conflict with itself, which alone can make good writing, because only that is worth writing about, worth the agony and the sweat. The human heart in conflict with itself. Is that a brand of what you are just talking about when you say you can't simply write about sympathy, something else too, because you yourself are finding yourself that you are caught with various shades of ambivalence or doubt or contradictoriness inhabiting your mind? Is that what
Yes.
you're saying?
Exactly right. You know, in other words, if we had a story in which the authorial presence was completely correct and the author was just slinging darts down at an idiotic character who was the manifestation of all that's wrong, that's a very boring story, you know. And it's a story that we never actually experience in the real world. You know, when I was covering the Trump rallies, you know, you'd talk to somebody who was very anti-immigrant. I covered it for the New Yorker. Very anti-immigrant. And then if you could sort of abide with them and be patient with them, you started to see that anti-immigrant would transform into something else, usually fearfulness, very limited experience of life. They didn't actually know any immigrants, for example, you know. So I think this heart in conflict with itself, it involves a very dangerous idea, which is that any exterior evil that makes you uncomfortable must have a corollary in your own heart, because otherwise it wouldn't make you so uncomfortable. You feel aversion, but somewhere in you, there's something that says, oh yeah, I thought that once, or I also have had that inclination. That's where it gets really complicated. And on the level of story, because we control all the means of production, we can make anything happen. We can prove any point, So the only way a story really comes alive is when the writer allows those different traces to come up and fight. But it's very easy to load the deck, And so in Chekhov, for example, you see always he'll make a strong case for A, and then he'll think, well, on the other hand, and he'll make a strong case for B. That, I think, is the essential work of fiction. But as we said earlier, a time like ours, I'm not sure about this, but a time like ours problematizes that a bit. Because if I bring up a racist, and then I make and I say, well, what's on the other side of that? Okay, you can do that, but at some point you are crossing the line, I think, into enabling, or maybe what you're doing is you're falsifying. Because if you make a too easy model of racism, you let the racist off the hook, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, if you speak about
a fascinating job.
Yes. If you speak about your wonderfully successful and wonderfully accomplished novel, Lincoln in the Bardo, what you're doing is that you're presenting all kinds of voices. So in other words, your expert ventriloquism of diverse voices, opposed voices, really produces some sort of a rich national tapestry, which doesn't allow everything to become about one thing. Instead, you have racists, you have rapists, you have people seeking their freedom, you have Lincoln, you have the sorrow of the child. So I think one of the things you have done wonderfully over a remarkable career is give voice to starkly different impulses that surround us at any moment. So congratulations and thank you for that. Let me ask you another question.
Thanks. Well, part of that, yeah, sure.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. You were going to say something. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that part of that game is, I think, acknowledging that all those voices are there in you somewhere. And the second part is noticing that to make a facsimile of a human being on the page, you don't really have to become that person. It's like that advertisement we have here. I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV. If you want to have a 97-year-old man who's bitter, well, I'm 61 and I'm sometimes grouchy. So you don't, the limits of the form are such that you don't really have to do full immersion in the person, but you can just have a flicker of that impulse. Then you can move and do another. So that's a powerful thing. And when I was finishing Lincoln, it was such a beautiful, it changed the way I thought. I was feeling and thinking in a more expansive way. I was much more generous. I was just interested in all kinds of things going on. And then that receded, so now I'm hoping to find a story that will make me feel that way again.
All right. Yeah, in a conversation recently with our mutual friend, Cheryl Strayed, you spoke a little bit about how in your own family, in the recesses of the family memory, there was the death of a child during the pandemic in 1918. And there was a wonderful statement you drew out from it about what it means then for a child to be recognized, even in posterity, to be named, etc. Can you speak a little bit about, because we are surrounded, especially also in India, where the reports are coming in of rising number of deaths from COVID, what does it mean for writers then to take note of these deaths and in some ways give people a proper burial?
Yeah, this little boy was my grandmother's brother. But this started with my father remembered some kid in his grandma's family had died during the epidemic. So we started researching it, and then we were able to say his name was Leroy. He was 3, and we were able to kind of collect some memories from some older family members. You know, when I was researching Lincoln, there was this riff that you find in the supernatural literature that the dead really love to be mentioned. That they like it when you have a photograph of them out. They like it when you speak fondly of them. They don't like it when you eradicate some trace of their existence. So I think that whether it's literally true or not, it makes a lot of sense. You know, I again, as a person who's 61 now, and I've tried all my life to make a mark. I think from the time I was a little kid, I remember that impulse. I want to be known. I want to do something good. Then you start to see that there isn't a mark big enough. You know, that there's not a mark that the world won't eradicate. There isn't. It's all delusion to think that, you know. But on the other hand, it makes the small remembrances that much more important. So I think, you know, one thing we can do now is just, well, my mode right now about the pandemic is just to kind of be quiet and listen, because this is unprecedented and I don't really have a take on it. But I know that when the dust settles, that the horror of this thing is contained in those little moments of somebody in the hospital going, oh my God, this is it for me. You know, what was my sin? I went to the store. I forgot my mask. You know, that's the stuff of great literature. But it's also important because otherwise, I do think meaninglessness is terrifying. If we can't remember the individual people, then it really becomes a horror show. You know.
Yeah, those little details that make up life, and that is the part of literature. Was that what was missing? I'm referring now to your Paris Review interview, when you were talking about Doug Unger, whom I remember very fondly. In Doug Unger's class, all of you wrote the stories, and they were kind of dead or not alive in a way. And then he asked everyone to tell a story, to just tell a story, maybe anecdotes. Yeah? And I thought when I reading that is the secret of storytelling. Is that what? Can you talk a little bit more about that and tell our listeners what you mean, and also how this mode of recovering or presenting details is the real literature?
Yeah, this is back in those ancient 1987 days that I know you remember in Syracuse. We had the first workshop, and it was maybe 4 or 5 weeks in, and all the stories were very clever, and they were all, or many of them were imitation Raymond Carver because he was there at that time, and they were all kind of full of freaky details that had never happened. You know, that kind of young writer hiding behind kitsch, or hiding behind a kind of a winking sensibility. And I think Doug just got fed up with it. It was all very slick and had no soul. So right before we went on break, he said, okay, I've had enough. After you have a little dinner, because he would serve us chili at the break, Amy would, his wife, you're going to each tell a story. And of course, we had no time to prepare it. You just had your chili and then you were on the floor. So the effect was, because most writers are natural hams and they're egotists and they're show-offs. Everybody, without having the time to construct something, you just had to go. You just had to wing it, which had the effect of bringing forth your natural charm. It's that the idea of if you're to be hung in the morning, so people told types of stories they hadn't told before. I told one that was funny, although my submissions hadn't been funny. So I think what he was onto there was that if compel a reader to read for 300 pages, you can't do that with fakery. You have to bring something authentic of yourself, just because it's hard to type 300 pages of contrivance, and somehow the idea was whatever you're going to charm with in your writing is going to have some kind of a relation to what you actually charm with in real life. Now, unfortunately, it's not a linear relationship. That would be nice if it was just, you're funny in real life, be funny in prose. But for me anyway, there was something powerful about realizing that the whole game was to compel the reader to keep reading. That's it. You know, you could forget the intellectual component, you could forget the theme and the politics and all in your lineage. You just had to keep that person turning the page, because as soon as they stopped, you were done, you know.
Yeah.
So that was, for me, very powerful, you know. And also the idea that the superpowers that you have, you might not be able to articulate just what it is. You only discover it in the line to line exchange with the you know, you have the reader on a hook, essentially, like a fisherman, and they pull and you pull, and there's a little bit of this is discovered in rewriting, you know. So that was a really liberating thing. And it was also interesting to go into that, and everybody got a laugh, or everybody told a good story. Yeah. Because they've been doing that their whole lives, of course, you know. Yeah.
Now, I'm going to talk to you a bit about influences for a second, but the thing I want you to first tell us about are the influences that came from your own family. Because on both sides of your family, in Texas and in Chicago, there were uncles and others who were great storytellers, right? I mean, you speak about your uncles in Texas who were great impersonators. They could. So this gift for storytelling, your early influences right from your family. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I was born in Texas, and my mother's family was there. And then we moved to Chicago, and my father's family was there. So once a year, we'd go to Texas for this big 2-week immersion in family. And I had these two uncles who at that time were kind of young hippies. They were maybe 20, 21, 20. And they were, I think they were kind of George Carlin fans, Richard Pryor fans, maybe later Steve Martin. So they had this ability to come into a family gathering and just take on a persona. They would just become some invented character. And they were really good at it. And they did it. They could sustain it, you know, sometimes past the point of comfort, you know. But what I took from that was just how much fun it was to be in their company, you know, to have that momentary signal given. Okay, now we're not being ourselves. Now we're not talking about pedestrian reality. We're going up into a higher level. It's cartoonish a little bit. These characters were always broad characters. And so I think what I took from it was just the joy of being in the audience when someone is doing that. It's a completely irrational, indefensible thing to do, to become someone else and to comically exaggerate somebody. But it was comforting, very comforting. And when they came in, you would just be waiting for this to break out. And if for some reason, I just remember this actually, if for some reason something was going badly in their lives, they wouldn't do that. They were sad. And that made you sad, that they didn't have that reserve of joy, you know. So years later, when I finally started writing in a way that I liked, that was the sensibility that I was channeling, that kind of joyous overflow that is completely irrational. There's no reason to do it, you know.
Beautiful.
And then on my father's side, same thing. There were a more staccato Chicago approach to life. But the whole thing was, there was a table in my aunt's house, you know, and the grown-ups would sit there and discuss politics and whatever, tell jokes. The kids were they were welcome, but they really weren't supposed to be there. But if you could hold your own, you know, if you could come in there and if you knew something about politics or you could tell a joke, then you were welcome to stay. So all of this has to do with, I think Junot Diaz said to me one time, writers are people who found out early in life that language has power. And that's, you know, and we do that in many different ways. But if the world says to you, young Ami, you speak beautifully, please come to the table. Or adults who haven't noticed you suddenly go, what did you just say? That's amazing. Then you're on the path. You know?
That's right. Now tell me, you and I were neighbors on Ackerman Avenue. Tell me about Ray Carver. Wasn't he on the street next to us? And did you meet him? I know he was a great influence, but wasn't he already dying by that time? And did you spend time with him?
He lived on Maryland, and you can still see the house today. I take my students by there sometimes. Yes, he was still in town. I don't think he was sick quite yet. I think it was later that year. And I just met him once. There was at the, you remember the Hall of Languages, the room on the top floor. He was at a reading. And so I nervously, conspired to stand near him. And I think we said hello. Paula, my wife, who you know, she knew him better. And she has stories about sitting at parties with him. And Chris Kennedy, of course, knew him very well. But he was a presence in the sense that everybody assumed that minimalist voice was the only real voice at that time. I don't remember reading much other than minimalism at that time in my life. I just thought it was clean and honest, and then, so it was a bit of a struggle to pull away from that and say, well, yeah, that's part of it, but but I do remember at one point a few years ago being at a party in Syracuse, and an older gentleman came up to me and he said, "Are you the writer?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I just wanted to share with you that I was Raymond Carver's doctor in the last years of his life. I diagnosed his illness, and he was a lovely, generous man. He just wanted to say that Ray had had a lot of dignity in those last months, and he remembered him fondly." Yeah. And that, there's another story. When we moved to Syracuse to teach, we bought Tobias Wolff's house, our teacher, and I was sitting on the porch one night, and some people walked by and they didn't see me, and they looked up at the house, and she said, "Oh, Toby's house. We love him so much," And I thought, well, isn't that like the way you want to be remembered? Someone walks by your empty house and says, "Oh, we love."
That's beautiful.
Something to shoot for.
Now, apart from,
of course, I'm sitting on the porch saying, "Well, I'm nice too. I'm nice too."
That's right. You are. In fact, on the matter of niceness,
you are too.
Thank you, George. On the matter of niceness, your commencement speech at our alma mater went viral, and one of the most quoted lines from that is about this line, which says, "What I regret most in my life are failures of kindness." You're a very kind person. When you got the MacArthur in 2006, I remember our friends from our cohort saying, well, what's bad is that we didn't get it, but what's great is that it went to the best person, So what is it about kindness that you find so important? And is it only to be a part of our lives, or should it also be a part of literature in a very concerted way?
Yeah, to your second question, yes, it should. And it is a part of all the great literature, I think. But I think we have to maybe do a little refining of our definition of kindness, because, in the States, it often means this kind of empty, new age, facile niceness, never having a harsh word. Somebody hits you with a rock, you say thank you. I really learned from that. So I don't think that's the model. I mean, in a Buddhist sense, kindness would mean you're concerned with the well-being of other beings, that ultimately. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you're always placating them or praising them. It means that you're really seeing them. So I after that book came out, I had a lot of chances to talk about kindness, which is very uncomfortable. And you see that really that kindness is sort of a placeholder for a lot of other virtues that are more important and harder. So, for example, I would say if you want to be kind, you have to be aware. For me, the most difficult thing is in every instant, it's possible for us to be 1% aware or 100% aware, and in that lies all good and evil, I would say. So if you go into the coffee shop and you see that the barista has been crying, and you have on your "Be Kind" T-shirt, what do? Well, that's an open question. There isn't just one answer. It depends on who she is or he is, and to know that, you would have to be really aware. So for me, that's a sticking point. I'm naturally pretty friendly. I believe theoretically in kindness. I don't like conflict. But those things don't really make me ultimately kinder, I don't think. I'm stuck. I've been stuck for maybe, well, since we knew each other, really. Even then I knew that kindness was the goal. But the trick is, how do you do it? And that's, I'm starting to see at this point in my life just what a huge karmic backlog an individual has of unkindness and unawareness, and how much work it would be to actually get to the bottom of that. But as a first principle, it could be worse. Try to be nice, try to get one's ego under control. That's a good starting place for sure.
Can you talk just a little bit about how you came to discover Buddhist teachings and what Buddhism has meant to you in daily practice?
Sure. Well, when we were friends in Syracuse, I met Paula, my wife, and we, in the romantic Syracuse ambiance, we got engaged in 3 weeks. And she's just been an amazing and teacher, really. So she, at one point when our kids were little, when you have children, you find out your limitations. You find out that you're not infinitely gracious, and you don't have a limitless reserve of energy. So we were both looking for some way to be better parents and to get a little bit of control and positivity. So we were going to the Episcopal Church, and both of us had Christian roots. And she was, I think, sort of more Protestant, and I was Catholic. And then at one point she took a class at that church in meditation, and they didn't really know how to do it. It was kind of they were listening to cassettes and so on. So Paula is very resolute and very brave. And so she found a Tibetan Buddhist teaching in town in Rochester and went and was really moved by it. And so she, long story short, she led us into Buddhism. And I have learned that she has a kind of wisdom about these things. Her impulses are always courageous. They tend to say, well, let's find out. And I would be stuck many years behind her, if I was alone. So she kind of led us into it. And I saw in the first couple of months of her practice, suddenly she was it was kind of amazing. She was, there were arguments that we would always have, argument 6B, for example, Suddenly she just wasn't having it. She didn't need it. So that was very inspiring. So I just, as in so many things, I just followed her into it.
Very nice. What I want to end with is a little recognition of the fact that you're also a teacher and a remarkable teacher by all accounts. And one of the things I'm sure you are asked at your readings is for writing advice, And I've kind of resigned myself to be saying a simple mantra to people. I say, write every day and walk every day. I want them to have a modest goal of 150 words and walk mindfully, meditatively for 10 minutes, That's my mantra. I wanted you to give our listeners your advice about writing. Thank you.
Well, the most truthful thing that I know is that, and it's maybe obvious, but we all have the notion that writing has to do with who we are and what we say first. So the first draft is so important. It isn't. It's nothing. It's nothing. The crux of the activity has to do with what you do to the first draft and how long do you keep doing it. So the big lesson, and I've had a few breakthroughs with students, not always, but sometimes, where you just say, how much you revise? And they say, oh, a lot, which means they changed commas, So just to say, look, it's an immensely hopeful thing to say, you are not your first draft at all. That's not even the beginning. The way we manifest ourselves as individuals, the way we find our voice, the way we find our individuality is by the many generations of changes that we make to the text. You put something down, you read it, you react to it. That sensor that tells you what you like or don't like your prose is intimately connected with your personality. If you get better at making those choices, those micro choices, you are infusing so much of yourself into that text that by the end, you can't believe, one, that it's so much like you, but also that it's better than you. My stories are much more interesting and kinder and meaner than me. So that, to me, it was a big liberation to realize that that didn't happen by you being a genius. It happened by you having an opinion over and over again, and every day being willing to say, well, maybe I was wrong yesterday. Let me try again. That to me is not only a good way to write, but in terms of living, very nice, because it tells us the correct thing about identity. I mean, I'm me, but that thing changes certainly every day. It actually changes every instant, So the idea that you don't have to be stuck with who you think you are. You don't have to be stuck with your current projections or your habits of bias or your habits of despair. All of that is constantly being remade, and revising is a way of proving that to yourself. Because, sometimes in bad ways, what was perfect yesterday suddenly stinks. Or you get to a certain point in the story and suddenly you go, oh my God, there's a beautiful opportunity there that I didn't see the previous 800 times I read it. So in a way, it's kind of training in the way your mind actually works. It's very fresh, your mind, and you have levels of goodness that are hidden. And I guess you would say this, they're in the subconscious. But revising like this, you suddenly become aware that you're not fixed. You're not a fixed entity, which in my case is good news.
Yeah. That's excellent advice. George, I have cherished your books, which I teach from in my classes.
Well, my present, and congratulations on your novels.
Thank you. And your nonfiction work, I cherish you as a friend, and the world cherishes you as a wonderful presence on the literary scene because of your inventiveness, your humor, your wisdom. So thank you for all. And I'll turn us over now to Sanjoy Roy, who might have something to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amitava.
Thank you so much. I look forward.
George, that was just absolutely brilliant. It was so considered, so beautiful, and writing 3.0. I can imagine everybody just wanting to hear what you've said again and again and again each time they revisit what they've written. So thank you for that brilliant 100th session in so many different ways, and for all of the kindness that seems to have permeated your being. And obviously you've shrugged off some of the karma that you've carried around, not just through your reach into Buddhism, but just in the very way that you have become such a considered human being. So thank you. And it was
Thank you.
really, it was Zen-like. It was just so beautiful, and such a beautiful 100th episode. And thank you all out there for watching and being so wonderful and being so supportive of what we set out to do. And as you know, what we set out to do is really, even as condominiums and gated communities became sort of republics and seeded from their city-states, etc., we just felt it was vital to allow for information and knowledge to flow freely across the world because of conversations like this, and without which we would be much poorer. So thank you all, and I do hope you all will join us for our next session at 8:30. It's the first in a series called Heart of the Matter, where we will present extracts on key themes, bringing together some of our best speakers on COVID-19, and this is to continue our celebrations of our 100th episode. 8:30 will include Pulitzer Prize winner Dr. Siddharth Mukherjee, Dr. Sharad Paul, Grace de Gabriel, Dr. Ambrish Sathwik, the chair of the infectious diseases at Imperial College, Ajit Lalwani, Kiran Mazumdar Shaw, and the director of the Science Museum. I look forward to seeing you all at 8:30 p.m.